So today we'll discuss topic 1.2 motion, and in this session we will mostly discuss about acceleration, as we already completed the physics topic related to speed and velocity. So last session, a quick revision, we started with the concept of scalar and vector. Scalar quantities have magnitude and unit, and vector quantities have magnitude, unit as well as direction. When we describe a motion, we normally describe in terms of speed, velocity, and acceleration. Speed is how much distance traveled by an object in a unit time, where velocity is a displacement in unit time. Speed is a scalar quantity, velocity is a vector quantity. And then we discussed some of the question in the last session. So in this question, a car travels 100 kilometers. The journey takes 2 hours. So this is the duration, that's 2 hours. The highest speed was 80 and the lowest is 40 km per hour. What is the average speed? So the formula to calculate average speed, the average speed is equals to total distance divided by total time. So the total distance which is traveled by the object, that's equal to 100, and the total time to complete the journey, that's equal to 2. So 100 divided by 2, so the average speed will be 50 kilometers per hour. So the option B will be the right answer. Now a new topic, which is acceleration. How we define the term acceleration? Acceleration is termed as rate at which the velocity changes, or you can also say change in speed, but it's a vector quantity, so it is also having a direction. So rate at which the velocity change, we call that as acceleration. Example, an object is there which is moving with a speed of 3 meters per second at position A. It is moving with a speed of 3 meters per second. Then this object changes its velocity. Now the speed is equals to 4 meters per second at position B. And the time interval for moving from position A to position B, that time is equals to, example, 2 seconds. So what is acceleration? The term acceleration means the change in the velocity or rate at which the velocity change. So what is the final velocity here? This is the final velocity. This one is a starting velocity. Starting velocity we also called initial velocity. And this one is a time interval. So the formula to calculate the acceleration is the change in the velocity divided by time. So final velocity, which is 4, initial velocity, it is 3, and what about the time? The time interval is 2, so 4 minus 3, that's equal to 1, divided by 2, so 1 divided by 2, acceleration is 0.5. And what about the unit of acceleration? The unit of acceleration is meter per second square. So the change in the velocity is simply termed as acceleration. If the velocity is not changing, the object is not accelerating. If velocity is changing, the object is accelerating. Is it clear, the concept of acceleration? The change in the velocity is simply termed as acceleration. So example, an object is at this position. The speed at which the object initially moving, that is called the initial speed or starting speed. Like example, at position A, the object is moving with 5 meter per second. So this is a starting speed, the starting speed, or we can also say initial speed. An object moved to position B and it is having a new speed or velocity. The new speed or the velocity of this object is example 15 meter per second. That's called the final speed. And the time it took to move from one position to another, that time interval is equals to 3 seconds. So what is acceleration? How we calculate acceleration? The formula to calculate acceleration is equals to change in the velocity divided by time. Or you can also say the change means the difference. So acceleration is equals to the final velocity minus the initial velocity divided by time. So what is the final velocity in this example? The final velocity is 15. What is the initial velocity? The starting velocity, that is 5, and divided by the time interval to move from first position to another, it is 3 seconds. So the time interval is 3. So 15 minus 5, that is equals to 10 divided by 3. So 10 divided by 3, that is equals to 3.33 meter per second square. So that is the acceleration of this object. And it is a vector quantity. So when it is a vector quantity, it is having a direction. In this case, because in all the object is moving towards right hand side, so direction of acceleration is also towards right, because we are getting a positive answer. Is it clear? How to calculate the acceleration or the change in the velocity? So acceleration is simply termed as the change in the velocity in unit time. Is it clear to everyone? The same way for acceleration, example, an object is moving with 3 meter per second at position A and it moved to new position B with the same velocity of 3 meter per second, and the time interval to move from position A to position B, that time is equals to 10 seconds. So what is the acceleration of this object? The formula to calculate acceleration, we can use the final velocity minus initial velocity divided by time. So what is the acceleration of this object? Acceleration of this object is 0 meter per second square. Why? Because there is no change in the velocity. And if we want to represent in symbols like the formula, instead of writing the whole formula, if we want to represent this in symbol, then we can use a formula that A is equals to V minus U divided by T. That's a short form. Instead of writing the whole formula, we can write acceleration is V minus U over T. But what is the meaning of V and what is the meaning of U? So V means the final speed or velocity. and u means the initial velocity. So instead of writing the whole formula, it's convenient even in exam. You can write this formula directly, that A is equals to V minus U over T, instead of writing that this acceleration is final velocity minus initial velocity divided by time. So A is equals to V minus U divided by T, where V is the final speed, that's equal to 3. U is the initial speed, that is also 3. So when I subtract 3 minus 3 divided by 10, so 3 minus 3 is 0 divided by 10. So that is, acceleration is 0 meter per second square. So it means this object is not accelerating, or acceleration of this object is 0. Another example, say an object is at position A and it was moving with a speed of 3 meter per second, and then it hits the wall and bounce back, example, with the same speed of 3 meter per second. Position B, it bounced back, and the time interval from A to B, like it hits and bounce back, the total time interval, example, it's 10 seconds. Now the question, again the same question, what is the acceleration of this object? So what about the acceleration of this object? As I mentioned, acceleration is a vector quantity. So directions are important. You have to consider the direction. Example, for a velocity, if right hand side you consider as positive, then left hand side you will consider as negative. So one is positive, the other one is negative. So right hand side motion I consider as positive, left hand side I consider as negative. And what is the formula for acceleration? Acceleration is equals to final, which is V, minus initial, which is U, divided by T. So acceleration is final. What about the final? This is the final, that is V, and this one is the initial, U. So final is equals to minus 3, minus initial is equals to plus 3, divided by time, that is equals to 10. So minus 3 that's equal to minus 6 divided by 10, and minus 6 divided by 10, that is equals to 0.6 meter per second square, and we are getting a negative answer. What is the meaning of this negative answer? It means it is towards left hand side. So this object is accelerating. Why this object is accelerating? Because acceleration means the change in the velocity, and velocity can change its magnitude, and velocity can change by its direction. So if the direction changes, there will be acceleration. If velocity magnitude changes, the number changes, there will also be an acceleration. Is it clear, this example? So object is accelerating if magnitude means number of velocity change, and if the direction of the velocity change. So when the direction of the velocity change, the object is accelerating. If magnitude of the velocity change, how it is minus 3 and minus 3? Because the formula for acceleration, if you check the formula for acceleration, the formula of acceleration is the final velocity minus the initial velocity divided by time. So what is the formula for what is the final velocity here? As we write the formula for acceleration, which is the change in the velocity or final velocity minus initial velocity. So the final velocity is minus 3. Then this is a minus or negative for the formula. That is minus. And then what is the initial velocity? Initial velocity is plus 3. So that initial velocity is plus 3. And divided by time interval, that's equal to 10. So this is minus 3 and minus plus, that is also minus. So that will be 3 divided by 10. So it will come out as minus 6 by 10, which is equals to 0.6 meter per second square. Initial velocity is not negative. The final, it's up to you. Any one of them you can take as negative. Initial velocity, final velocity, this minus is for formula. Initial velocity can be positive, can be negative. It depends on what sign you consider. If you see, if the right hand side you consider as positive, left hand side will be negative. So 6 divided by 10, that's equal to 0.6 meter per second square. So acceleration of this object is 0.6 meter per second square. Because you are getting a negative answer, so if you are getting a negative answer, so left hand direction we consider as negative. So it is, we say that the direction of acceleration is towards left hand side. Is it clear? I'll give another example, a similar example to this. Initial can be positive, it can be negative, but the formula is final minus initial divided by time. So this negative sign is not for initial velocity. This negative sign is for formula, that final velocity minus initial divided by time, as acceleration is change in the velocity. So example, an object moving with 10 meter per second and it bounced back 12 meter per second, and the time it took to bounce back, that time interval example is 20 seconds. And the question is, find the acceleration of this object. So the formula to calculate acceleration, that acceleration is the change in the velocity divided by time. If you took the final velocity as positive, like the previous example, you are taking the final velocity as positive, the directions, you're taking left as a positive and you're taking right as negative. So in that case, because the left hand side I am taking as positive and right hand side I am taking as negative. So when I apply the formula here, acceleration is final minus initial. So final is 3, this is minus, and initial is minus 3 divided by time, which is 10. So 3 minus minus plus, so 3 plus 3 divided by 10. So 6 divided by 10, I will get plus 0.6 meter per second square. So when I'm getting plus 0.6 meter per second square, but what is the significance of this sign? Sign shows the direction. So plus sign we took as left. So that is also towards left hand side. So that does not make difference to the final answer. The sign is only showing the direction. The significance of the sign is the direction. So I'm getting the same answer. When I was taking right hand side positive, left hand side negative, I was getting minus 0.6. So it means I'm getting a negative 0.6, or expression is 0.6 meter per second square towards left. But if I take left hand side positive and right hand side negative, then my final answer is coming out as 0.6 meter per second square, or positive 0.6 meter per second square. But in this time, we are taking left hand side as a positive direction, so that we are getting the same result. So it's up to you which direction you want to consider. If final you want to consider as positive, then upward will be like, it depends on which direction you want to consider. So example, if I consider upward as positive, then downward will be negative. So upward we are considering as positive and downward we are considering as negative. And what is the formula for acceleration? It's a change in the velocity, or we can also say the final velocity minus initial velocity, divided by time. So what is the final velocity? The final velocity is plus 12, or 12 minus, this is a negative sign for the formula, initial velocity here, that is minus 10. So I'll write as minus 10 in a bracket, because that minus 10 will be multiplied with a negative sign of the formula, divided by time interval. So how much time it took? 20 seconds. So this will be 20. So 12, this minus multiplied by minus, minus minus is plus. So 12 plus 10 divided by 20. 12 plus 10 is 22. So 22 divided by 20, that's equal to, yes, you will select the positive and negative by yourself. It's up to you. One of them you will consider positive, the other one will be negative. So we are getting plus 1.1 meter per second square. So positive, if we are getting a positive answer, the positive direction is upward. So it means this object is accelerating upward, or direction of expression is upward. So significance of the sign is only for determining the direction. About positive and negative, Abdullah Sarfraz, it's up to you, because velocity is a vector quantity. If you remember the last session, we discussed the velocity, that if direction changes, the velocity also changes. So if one of the direction we consider positive, the other direction we have to consider as negative, because here the velocity is given 10 meter per second and 12 meter per second, but they are changing the direction. It is changing the direction. One is upward, another one is downward, so they are in opposite direction. If one of the direction you consider as positive, then the other direction you have to consider as negative, because it is a vector quantity, and vector quantities are represented by a specific direction. So how we can distinguish that object was moving towards left, then it moved towards right, or object is moving downward, then it will move upward, by considering the direction, for by considering a sign for the direction. So if one of the direction you consider a positive sign, the other direction you will consider as negative sign. The answer won't be different, Abdullah Khan. Like example, here I consider downward negative and upward positive, I will get the final velocity minus initial divided by time. So I'm getting at plus 1.1 meter per second square. So plus direction, plus means upward direction. So I'm getting a result in upward direction. But if the same question, for the same question, now if an object is moving, this was 10 meter per second square and 12 meter per second square at position B, and the time it took, that is equals to 20 seconds. So when we are if we are considering, because the direction is changing, so whenever the direction change, the velocity also change, and we have to consider sign for each direction. For opposite direction, one is considered as positive, the other will be negative. So right now, in the previous example, the same example, I consider upward positive, but now I'm considering downward as positive. So then upward will be negative. So downward direction I consider positive, upward direction I consider negative. When I'm finding the acceleration, that is the change in the velocity or final velocity minus the initial velocity divided by the time interval. The final velocity, it's minus 12. This minus is for the formula. The initial velocity is plus 10 divided by time interval, so that is 20. So minus 12, then minus plus, that is minus 10 divided by 20, and minus 12 minus 10, that's equal to minus 22 divided by 20, which is equals to minus 1.1 meter per second square. And I told what is the significance of the sign. Sign shows the direction. Because I'm getting a negative answer, minus 1.1, and upward direction was negative, so I'm getting a result 1.1 meter per second square upwards. And the previous also I was getting a result 1.1 meter per second square upward. So this, the positive and the negative sign, only the significance for direction. The magnitude does not change. Initial velocity means the starting velocity. The term initial means the starting velocity. And this one is a final velocity. So here the initial velocity is 10, the starting velocity. The final velocity is minus 12 and divided by time interval, so we get the acceleration. Is it clear? Yes, Saim Ahmed, what's your question? You can use a mic. Yeah, what about velocity? Yes, you can go on. Instead of typing, you can use a mic. Velocity means the distance traveled in a unit time. How much distance the object travel. This we discussed yesterday, the concept of the velocity. Velocity is a displacement divided by time. That's called a velocity. Like an object travel a certain distance, move from one place to another. Example, object travel 4 meters and it took 2 seconds. So what is the velocity? Velocity is equals to distance traveled in a unit time. So 4 divided by 2, that is equals to 2 meter per second. That's called velocity. For sign, we choose which one is which direction positive, the other will be negative. But for initial and final, always the starting velocity is called the initial velocity. Like where the motion start, you can see like when the ball is bouncing, so first the ball will hit the ground and then it will bounce. So when it is hitting the ground, that moment the speed or velocity is called initial, and when it bounce back, that will be final. So you cannot say final or initial. Final, initial are fixed, but about the sign directions, it's up to you. One is positive, the other one will be negative. So example, an object is moving with a speed of 10 meter per second, and it reach a new position with the same speed of 10 meter per second in the same direction, and the time interval to move from position A to position B, that time is equals to 4 seconds. Now question is there a change in speed? Yes or no? So there is no change in speed. Is there a change in direct velocity? Yes or no? Because the direction does not change, so both remain. Like if this is plus 10, this will also be plus 10. So here there is no change in direction, so velocity is not changing. Is the object accelerating? So the answer is no. This object is not accelerating. This object is not changing the velocity, because whenever there is a change in velocity, then the object will accelerate. If the velocity does not change, the object does not accelerate. Is it clear, this example, to everyone? But if the object changes the direction, then the velocity changes. Like example, if I say object is moving with 10 meter per second, then bounce back with the same speed of 10 meter per second. 10 meter per second, 10 meter per second. This is A, B, and the time it took, that is example 4 seconds. And the similar question as previous. So the first one, is there a change in speed? Change in speed. Speed does not depend on the direction. Speed only depends on number. Is there a change in speed? Yes or no? Speed is only distance travel in a unit time. It does not depend on the direction. So if the number does not change, you can see it is 10 meter per second, then also 10 meter per second. So speed does not depend on the direction. So there is no change in speed. But is there change in velocity? Yes, there is a change in velocity. Why? Because velocity is a vector quantity, it depends on direction. If one of them is positive, the other direction should be negative. So velocity is actually plus 10 and then it becomes minus 10. So velocity changes, yes. And whenever the object velocity change, what we call object is accelerating. So this object is accelerating. Why it is accelerating? Because there is a change in the velocity. There is no change in speed. Why there is no change in speed? Because the number, the magnitude or the value does not change, but as the direction changes, so the velocity also changes. And whenever the velocity change, the object is always accelerating. And what about the acceleration of the object? When we calculate the acceleration of this object, the formula for acceleration is equals to change in the velocity or final minus initial divided by time. The change in the velocity, the change in velocity is final minus initial. Like if I want to calculate the change in velocity, that is the final minus initial. What is the final value for the velocity? It's minus 10 and minus the initial is plus 10. So the change in velocity is minus 10 minus 10, that's equal to minus 20. So change in the velocity is minus 20 and divided by time, that will give you the acceleration. So final velocity is minus 10 minus the initial velocity is plus 10 divided by time interval is equals to 4. So it is minus 20 divided by 4, that's equal to minus 5 meter per second square. So negative, we are getting a negative, and negative means towards left. So this object is accelerating towards left hand side. Is it clear? But what about change? How to calculate change in speed? That is also final minus initial, but that does not depends on the time and it does not depends on the direction. So change in speed is 10 minus 10. That is equals to 0. The change in the speed. Because the speed does not depends on the direction. If direction changes or it does not change, it's not necessary that the speed changes. Speed depends only on the numbers. So I'll share another link and continue the discussion of acceleration.